Welcome to West Richmond's weekly Talkback. I'm Kevin Beers. I'm the Director of Technology and Media here at the church, and this is Pastor Dave, the pastor of the church. And we're going to talk about his message from Sunday morning, April 16th. So, Dave, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for asking.
Okay. First question I got for you. So this is a new series that you just started. It's called Sharing God's Love. And it's a three-part series. The first one was called Listening.
Correct.
Okay, just going to the topic of sharing God's love, what made you choose that as a topic?
Well, really, basically two reasons. The first reason is pretty much just a logistical response. This spring, we had been walking through the Gospel of Matthew, and we had reached the end, and the last sermon in Matthew was this passage, Matthew 28, verses 16 to 20, where Jesus instructs his disciples to go out into the world, baptizing them and making disciples of them. And I just thought that instead of having one particular sermon on that, it warrants us to spend a little bit more time with it.
Okay. Now, and that whole idea of evangelism.
Right.
Now, one of the things you said in your sermon was, I know in some circles the word evangelism doesn't go over too well. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, I think most people, Christian, really are reluctant to share the love of God. I think it makes them feel that they're presumptuous, maybe a bit arrogant. It's awkward. Our society doesn't really treat those who want to share their religion well. They look down at people like that. So I think a lot of people, when they hear the word evangelism, it's like, oh yeah, I don't want to go there.
Okay. And linked on to that, you also said, go into the world and preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. Mm-hmm. Now, I totally understand that because coming from a brethren perspective, that is almost a motto of this denomination.
Yeah.
Why do you think the brethren are so reluctant to ever mention why they're doing what they're doing?
Wow. That's a tough question, Kevin. I can't speak for the denomination, but I think with their work, with their ecumenical work that began, right after World War II, when they joined the National Council of Churches and then the World Council of Churches, and they're working ecumenically, I think that they felt a little bit embarrassed by who they are and whose they are and what evangelism really meant. I think that perhaps they felt like service was doing work, serving the Lord in those kind of capacities was a better way of quote unquote evangelism than preaching the word.
Okay. Now, I'm familiar with the disaster ministry that the Church of the Brethren does. Mm-hmm. And one of my understandings is that they are not to speak about why they are helping other people.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
And that's my understanding. Now, I could be wrong. If you're out there and you do Brethren disaster ministry, let me know if I'm wrong about that. But my understanding was you don't initiate a conversation on why you're doing what you're doing. Now, I might be wrong about that, like I said. Mm-hmm. But now, I understand the reasoning behind that, because you could get someone who is very aggressive and like, it could almost come off as you owe us for doing what we're doing. Mm-hmm. And of course that's not what you want. Because your entire sermon was on the topic of listening. Listen first before you speak.
Right.
And I totally agree with that. A friend of a friend through Facebook who disagreed, he was a stern atheist and he disagreed with everything I said. So all I did was let him speak his mind. And I let him air what he had to say. And I said, well, if you think about this with what you're saying, I never attacked him. I never told him he was wrong. I just said, my perspective is a little bit different. And through that, we ended up becoming friends. And then he disappeared for a while. And then about a year later, I heard back from him, and he was now a Christian, fully committed, very evangelistic. Now, I will say his method of evangelism is not to confront, but just to ask deep questions about your eternity. What does your eternity look like? What choices have you made in your life? And none of his questions demand an answer right then and there, but just planting seeds. He sees himself as someone who's planting seeds, kind of like what I did with him. And he's, when he sees people later, then many have converted to Christianity just because he planted the seeds. And that's where he listens first, like you were saying in your sermon, listening first. And then just leave them with a very deep question based on where they were. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, yeah, absolutely agree with you on that. I think I was leading to that in a way towards the end of my sermon when I talked about John Stott's, the late Anglican church leader John Stott, who said that we are to double listen, meaning that we are to hear the person's voice as we listen to him or her. We try to discern God's voice within that voice and see where the Spirit might already be working. And maybe, if there's anything to be said, say something to the point of, I see perhaps how the Spirit might be working with you or in you because of this particular pain or suffering, or, I don't know. But I think in a similar way, you may not plant a seed, but you may have that person recognize that, well, maybe God is already doing some things and moving me in a particular direction. I don't know.
Okay. And one last thing. So as I was thinking about your sermon some more, something popped into my head, and I believe it's Acts 17. I actually I copied down the quote, but I didn't say where I got it from, but I believe it was Acts 17, where Paul goes before the Areopagus. Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus. Oh my goodness. Areopagus, and said, "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you're very religious, because I walked around and examined your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship is something unknown, I now proclaim to you." Then he goes on to say, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples made by human hands." And he goes on from there, explaining that this unknown God that they were worshiping is the real God. And to me, I related that to listening, because he wasn't listening through conversation, but he was listening by observing the life that was going on around him. And then when he spoke on their grounds. And one of the things I always say is, you have to get into other people's life before you can actually start sharing yours.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely agree with you on that, and it does. I mean, what Paul was doing in Athens is a similar practice that I was suggesting in the sermon yesterday, and that is to read the person somehow, to perceive how God might be working there, to observe and understand, to walk a mile in their shoes, to really, like Tim Keller said in a quote that I said, for the skeptic to really understand where the skeptic is coming from, to know and to be able to respond to the skeptic in a way that they would say, yeah, that's exactly what my point is about Paul. So you can really relate to that person in a trusting relationship where you can dialogue on these deeper things. I mean, I think it takes that relationship, the trust in one another as friends, before you can really enter into a serious conversation where the person really is responding to you and you're listening back. I mean, it feels to me pretty integral for God to work between the two people.
Okay. Well, we're interested in what you think about the sermon. If you haven't seen the sermon, the link will be down in the description. Check it out. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next time on Weekly Talkback.